have access to a spirit, a strength that enlarges and empowers you. Even better, you don't need to wait for the next big movement. You can heal the world. It's time for governance by grace. Welcome to Gracearchy with Jim Babka. Hey, my friend, as you can tell, it's a bright, sunshiny day here in the Democratic Socialist Republic of California.
See, now I hope people can take that with the good cheer in which it's attended. Because
oh my gosh, yeah, we pay more to the federal government than we get back by $81 billion, and we help Texas, who gets $71 billion more from the federal government than California does. But that's just an interesting factoid.
All right, state welfare now.
State welfare.
We got a guest here today.
Oh yeah, we do.
Doug Stuart, who is with Libertarian Christian Institute. I'm a big fan of theirs. I've been on their programs. I've been on his program, which we'll put in the show link for people to see. We have shared that out before. And I love what they're doing. And so we're going to bring him in. He was the CEO until the end of last year. Now he's the content director. Doug, what does it mean to be the content director?
It means I'm doing the same job I was already doing, which is being in charge of content. It's just that my title now accurately reflects what I'm here to do.
And you got that big pay increase too, right?
No, it didn't happen that way.
All right, so we will get into.
I got the job description and assigned responsibilities. What I wanted.
Okay, we'll get into some of that, the details of that job description a bit later in the show. Since you are from Libertarian Christian, as opposed to having some long bio, I would like to just kind of jump in with a couple of quick questions and explain for our audience who Libertarian Christian Institute is.
Yeah.
What would the world be like if you guys were 100% successful?
If we were 100% successful, I wouldn't be on Gracearchy. I would be every day on Fox News and CNN being as the person who says, this is the Christian view on politics.
Okay.
How's that for a short answer?
That is
I'd also come on your show, Jim, but that's
awfully gracious of you, but I think you actually would do more good if you were there. Okay. So what stands in the way of your vision? What problem are you folks attempting to solve?
Well, what stands in the way of a vision, of course, is the state. That's a kind of a cheesy, quick answer, but really what it is that we have a lot of Christian thinkers, pastors, scholars who, for better or for worse, many of them are very, very good. The Christian view of how do we look at politics has, at least in America, been bifurcated between what we would call conservative and liberal, or left and right. And there is a more consistent or coherent way of looking at politics that is what we would call libertarianism. And those views we can kind of elucidate over the course of this conversation. But essentially, what we have is a handful of obstacles. Some of them are just sloppy thinking. Some of it is bad theology. Some of it is just unthinking theology. People who just sort of read a verse and say, "Oh, well, look, Jesus says, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's, render unto God what is God's. I guess that means that I need to pay. I guess that means that I can have allegiance to Caesar and allegiance to God at the same time." And it's like, well, no, that's one verse. We have to keep that in context. So, overly reductionist thinking about the way the Bible addresses politics is probably one of the biggest challenges that we like to address. And just consistent thinking on certain values. I mean, there's a lot of conservatives who say they're for small government, but where are the conservatives in politics who are actually for small government? Because at some point they will want the government to be regulating something that none of the three of us here would be like, well, wait, that's not Christian, nor is that actually libertarian. So the consistency between libertarian thought and Christian political thinking is very, very close.
You weren't quoting your hat just now. You were actually quoting a verse. What does your hat say?
Yeah, so the hat says, and we can put a graphic up, or maybe you can use it as your thumbnail, and some people have already seen it. Here we go. It says Jesus, and then Caesar is crossed out, is Lord. And what that is alluding to is the phrase in the first century when people said that Jesus is Lord. It is a very political statement because people people in the first century, especially in Rome, would declare that Caesar is Lord and Caesar is the savior of the world, and Caesar was the one who could bring peace to the world and solve all the world's problems. And so to say Jesus is Lord is not just some religious statement, although of course that is. It's not a personal statement of like, oh, Jesus is the person I look to for guidance, or Jesus is the person I trust for my salvation. Those are all true things. But in the first century, in its context, to say Jesus is Lord is also to say, and Caesar is not. And so it would basically be like saying, Joe Biden or Donald Trump or Barack Obama or George W. Bush is not my president. Jesus is my president. No, obviously they're not kings or Caesars, although they probably want to be,
Yes.
and to some extent act like it. But the
Yes.
government is not who I find in my authority. It's Jesus. And so that would be probably a broader way of bringing it down.
Okay. We're going to come back to that. I definitely want, at least I'm going to try. We'll see where the conversation goes. I definitely want to unpack that whole idea a bit more. It's a great thing to talk about. But still talking about LCI here, Libertarian Christian Institute. What is the specific high-level strategy that your team is following? What is LCI trying to accomplish? What's its mission in the world?
Yeah, I'll do as brief a history as I can. As an organization, we were founded in 2015, so we're hitting 10 years here pretty soon, later this year. And it was predominantly, we were on a roll at libertarianchristians.com, just creating articles, essays, either commentary on current events or just evergreen type stuff for Christians to think about with politics. And that was founded by Norman Horn. I became involved with LCI, or what was prior to that, just libertarianchristians.com, as a writer in 2010. So 2015 rolls around, I'm involved in the organization that becomes formed, and our main goal is to produce materials, and sometimes we would attend events. We actually held some conferences around that time where we would basically promote the Christian view of libertarianism. And so we'd be at places like International Students for Liberty Conference, now LibertyCon. We would hold breakout sessions, and we would be part of panels. And so we would promote a view of libertarianism explicitly from a Christian point of view. So we will, I think our website says that we're making the Christian case for a free society. And so that's the high level view. What we have done over the past few years is we have, I wouldn't say shifted as in we're getting rid of the essays and articles and evergreen material, but we are also focusing heavily on media production, podcasts predominantly, and in just last year and into this year, we're really doubling down on videos. And so we are basically producing material for people to consume that will help them make the Christian case for a free society in a much better way from a variety of different, perspectives. For example, we have a podcast called the Protestant Libertarian Podcast. And so Alex Bernardo, the host, is very much about how do I use biblical theology and how do I talk about libertarianism in one show. And then we have the Reformed Libertarians podcast that comes in from a Reformed perspective. My co-host for the Libertarian Christian podcast is a guy named Cody Cook, who is an Anabaptist. And so we'll probably talk about this. He's written a book called The Anarchist Anabaptist. And so we have a pretty ecumenical approach to what kind of Christian you can be, and here's how libertarianism can fit into that. And so we have our core values, and we have our sort of ecumenical, like here's how we define what is Christian. But then we also have niche views, what's the word? I'm thinking traditions, denominationally as well, that is making the appeal to those types of crowds.
Very good. Is this a ministry for you? Personally?
Yeah. Well, yes. I'm only chuckling because it sort of ties into your pay raise question below or earlier in the show, which is like I'm chuckling and say, well, yes, because there's a lot of time I give that is quote unquote uncompensated. But I think about this from time to time, and I think I'm giving a lot of my energy to something that I'm passionate about. And yes, I do get compensated, but that's kind of beside the point. There is something to which I gravitate toward, and that is what I'm doing with LCI, whether it's the specific task of helping a book get published, or the specific task of getting somebody as high profile as Spike Cohen or Glenn Scrivener on our shows to sort of promote those views. Those are things that I actually get pretty excited about. So yes, I would say this is definitely a ministry for me. And I went to seminary And I never saw myself in what would be sort of full-time ministry, like a pastoral role or chaplain or anything like that. I never saw myself in that. And this is not something that I do full-time. LCI is not my full-time job. But it is something that I put considerable effort into. And I feel like the quote-unquote ministry training that I got in seminary has prepared me to do what I'm doing at LCI. So
that's awesome. So what do you tend to do during a week or a month? What is your typical activities?
Well, lately, it's very tough for me to sort of say, oh, well, here's what my normal week looks like. Usually it just means putting out fires and, coordinating things with my team or whatever. But I'll hold up what I've been doing the last 2 months, which is helping get these 2 books off to print. Now, you can see one says advanced reader copy. And this is how stressed I am some days, Jim. This is supposed to say advanced reader copy, not advanced, because we don't have a bottom shelf version. So there was a typo, and I didn't even notice it until I got it in my hands. And then also the Anarchist Anabaptist by Cody Cook. Both of these books are things that Cody's book is already out. The other one is an advanced reader copy stage. So it's in its advanced stages. I don't know. I can't rectify that. There's my vulnerability on the table there. Anyway, that's what I've been doing.
When is House Divided going to be out?
Pre-orders start in March, I believe March 15th. And then, which you can get at housedividedbook.com. And the official release date is April 12th. Now, I can tell you the specifics about those. March 15th, 2020. Do you remember what that was? Do you remember what was being promoted?
That was the day that the lockdowns began.
2 weeks?
Yep.
To stop 2 weeks, 2 years
flatten.
to stop. 2 weeks to stop the curve, flatten it, whatever. That didn't happen. Obviously, we know this in retrospect. Some of us were like, really? 2 weeks? That's all it's going to take? And then April 12 represents the first Sunday in 2020 that was, I believe it was Easter Sunday, that everybody was hoping we'd all get back to. I mean, Trump at that time was saying, oh, well, we're going to be able to get back to church by Easter because he was being optimistic, and I don't know what his motivations for saying that were. And a lot of churches didn't. And so anyway, House Divided is going to be released on April 12th.
We have a separate podcast we hope to share with people where we've talked to you about specifically that. So we'll include those details down in the show notes when that episode becomes available.
Great.
And we'll get to that. But let's talk about Cody's book for a little bit.
Sure.
What he's trying to advance an Anabaptist case. What is the significance of an Anabaptist case in this instance?
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people realize that if it weren't for at least a heavy influence in the Anabaptist movement in the West, we would probably not have liberalism as we understand it today. And I don't mean liberalism as in like the Nancy Pelosi, Democrat type liberalism, but more of the classical liberalism that you and I are in tradition of. We wouldn't have those classical liberal values as they are shaped today. And so the Anabaptist movement, and you should have Cody on to talk about this because he kind of gets into it, is an underrepresented or understood. That sounds really weird, but it's not well understood their influence. And so you can kind of draw a straight line between what their influences were to what we call classical liberalism today. And so Cody is making this case in the book that to be an anarchist libertarian type person, you actually owe a lot to the Anabaptist tradition, which is the peace tradition. And you don't actually have to be a full-blown pacifist to sort of see this or to even sort of appreciate that, even though that is the roots of the Anabaptist movement. And so, believe it or not, if it weren't for those types of people, what liberalism we understand today would be a little different.
Yeah. And
it's actually, I just pointed out, it's actually not a very long book. It's about 120 pages. Yeah, 135 pages. It's not lengthy. It's actually very readable.
Yeah, this is coming from the heart of a real Anabaptist too, because I believe he just put out another book that basically gets into the distinctives of that faith.
Yeah, yep. He has another book out called The Pocket Anabaptist.
Yep. All right, I want to come back to something that you just said a few moments ago. Jesus is Lord. So it's really interesting. I was just explaining to somebody the other day that we came from a time when the Caesar actually was God. It was his deific power. He was one God of many, but it was his deific power that enabled him to be in that position, and he should be reverenced as such. And the early Christians were attacked in part for being atheists because they didn't recognize this. I mean, this is actually historical fact. Then, as the church and state begin to merge, a new era emerges where kings are standing right next to the bishop. That's where they're positioned on the chessboard too. And there is a divine right that has been given to them. So they're in cooperation with the institutional religion, but they have a divine right from God. And we can see the fossil of this even in the UK, where King George is involved in the church, but he actually he is the head of state. And he asks the prime minister to form a government. So the power, what is the state? The state, we've had states since the 1600s. Now basically the government's, worldwide. They believe they're an institution that has the right to initiate force to achieve their social goals. They have that power, and maybe even some have called it a moral authority, where they're allowed to use violence, unlike the rest of us. And we now do this democratically. We allegedly have some kind of social contract where we're able to give the state this power that was formerly considered deific. So if we lived in a world where Jesus was Lord instead, would that give us a theocracy or something else? What would it look like?
Well, that's a trick question. Would that give us a theocracy? Because that's dangerous. That's dangerous speech.
Would it give us a theonomy?
No, it wouldn't give us a theonomy.
Okay.
I wouldn't do that because, or I wouldn't think it would, because what that requires is a different type of forced governance.
For those of us in the cheap seats, theonomy is.
Jim, how would you define theonomy? I'm not sure I would give a really good
It's an ecclesiastical authority. So you have a book, your constitution becomes the Bible, and you have men that rule instead of God, in the stead of God, as God's vicars, to be able to say this is what the law is going to be. So that would
be like Iran under Khomeini.
Yes.
Yes, but Christian, so it's better.
But Christian, right.
I was sarcasm, just so you know. I don't know what would get us taken off of YouTube was the fact that I just sort of dissed Islam, or that it sounded like I might have been promoting Christian nationalism. I don't know, but I'm not. No, so to answer your question, no.
There are people who actually have a full construct of what it would be like to have a Christian state. And one of the things that the left does wrong, Bill, to be perfectly blunt, is they constantly exaggerate. So they act like the people who are in the White House right now are these people, and they're not even close. I know and have met these people. I even have a couple of them that are friends on Facebook. I mean, they're this what they want and how they want to run the world is really much more, like you just said. It's much more kind of, they would be ayatollahs of a sort. And so every time I hear this, they're Christian nationalists or whatever, it's very much exaggerated in terms of like what their intentions and goals are.
Yeah.
Okay.
So what was the original question? I'm sorry.
Back to this question of what would a world look like if Jesus was Lord, if Jesus was king, if Jesus was president?
Well, we would have people, if Jesus were king or president, or I don't think that would be kind of the power. That wasn't the power that Jesus sought, as we saw. And the power that Jesus sought was to serve one another. And so if we had a world where the nation was committed to finding ways to serve one another, to lay down our lives for one another, and to cooperate, it would look a whole lot more what we would call libertarian than it would authoritarian, right? And so if we have something called a Christian nation, if that's even something we could even aspire to, it would not at all be a top-down sort of institution. It wouldn't be where you would have the Christian prince, as Stephen Wolfe would want, or you would have a Christian president who enforces Christian laws based on their interpretation and very narrow interpretation of the Bible. It would look like individuals choosing to have allegiance only to Jesus, and insofar as their allegiance is only to Jesus, they love God and they love their neighbor as themselves. And so to live in God's kingdom actually means to be able to understand what your rights are, and also be able to understand when you can sort of I don't know how to put this, but like self-choose when you can assert rights that we kind of take for granted in the United States. And that could probably get us into a whole big conversation about pacifism and whether or not Christians should be pacifists. But the idea behind
Well,
what
they
does it
should
look
at
like
least,
to be.
Doug, they should at least be anti-war.
Yes. Oh, definitely for that. That's
Well,
kind of a given,
I don't.
yeah.
I mean that at all levels, because
Yeah.
the state is basically war. It's a form of war. Like
Yeah.
it's not an accident that when politicians get up, they're going to wage a war on drugs. They're going to wage a war on crime. They're going to wage a war on illiteracy. They wage wars all over the place.
So we need to wage peace on war. How about that? How about we go with that?
Okay.
I mean, if you think about it, the way that I think Greg Boyd puts it is that he basically says that Jesus is not like, Jesus is a fighter and Jesus is a person who wages war against war, but the way that Jesus wages war is through words, not through actual violence. And so you can actually, I mean, anybody who's taken nonviolent communication courses or has done any sort of research and activity in reduction of violence in tense situations, they know that you can use words to convince people to step away from violence. And I think our world would look a lot more like that than it would, hey, let's everybody arm up in order to make our society, more safe or something like that. I'm not saying that there's, just to be clear, I believe in gun ownership rights, but I also don't think that that's a given as a Christian, that you absolutely have to always have a gun or something like that in order to utilize violence. The default should be to wage peace, if you will, to borrow a kind of cringy leftist term.
What is the biblical evidence for this?
Well, I don't know. I mean, if we're going to say that Jesus is, no, that's fine. I'll give you. Oh, well, Jesus is the Prince of Peace, and so what did Jesus do? He served one another. I mean, we look at the life of Christ, and you see that Jesus served and didn't commit any violence. And even in the prophecy in Isaiah, it says there was no violence found in him. For those who want to bring up the money changers. So, yeah, I mean, I think the life of Jesus is pretty evident. It's also a good reason to read Cody's book and some other books that he has written on this as well.
Okay.
I'll keep that answer short and tease it out.
So getting into you personally, let's start with your faith journey. What, how is it that you come to be a believer?
Yeah, well, whenever somebody asks me about my faith journey, it's kind of interesting because I have to sort of figure out, well, where do I start? Because I grew up in a Christian home. It was a pretty conservative Christian home, and if that's one way to start the story, it's be like, oh, well, I just grew up in a Christian family, and I didn't really rebel against it, and so I just accepted, and I had my rebellion, sort of within the Christian faith. But there are some circumstances under which I became part of my family because I'm adopted, that one could very easily see God at work and bringing me into the family and parents that I have. And so I can look back at that, of course, in retrospect, and my parents all saw this happen in real time, of course. I guess I saw it happen in real time, but as an infant, I didn't identify it. So you basically have a story where I was put in a Christian home, in a loving home, and circumstances otherwise, I wouldn't be here. Definitely not on this show. I don't know, how long I would have lived or whatever, but my life circumstances would have been quite different. And so my Christian story was pretty conservative. If anybody wants to sort of anchor that in something they know that's familiar, think conservative Baptist. That might be a good way to sort of anchor that. We were friendly with the Anabaptist tradition as well, because there were some churches that we would participate in things. But when I got to college, I went to a Baptist college, and after that, I started to sort of explore and make my faith my own. And because I grew up in a conservative Baptist-like home, we were Republicans, and we just could not, except for some random issues here and there, we couldn't understand why any Christian would ever be a Democrat. And so I wanted to make that faith my own. And I also wanted to, I also had some questions about what it meant to say we wanted, like when I grew up, we wanted America to be a Christian nation, or it was a Christian nation, and we're losing that, and all of that kind of rhetoric. And it wasn't high Christian nationalism strong Christian nationalism like you see today, but it was a, hey, we should be a Christian nation. We should have a bunch of Christians running the government if we can, and we should have as many Christians in America as possible, and sort of inculcate those values. Well, after college, I kind of questioned that. It's like, well, how is that any different from, any other particular religion trying to enforce its laws? It's great that I believe that this is the right one, but I don't think that's quite right. The other thing that was happening for me was, well, maybe at the time this would have been Al Gore running for president. Maybe Al Gore isn't so bad. Maybe I'm just taking it on my parents' word that Al Gore would be a bad president. So I looked into Al Gore. Turned out I didn't like Al Gore. But over the next few years, I started realizing that there were some values that what you would call the Christian left espoused, that I found appealing. And I think, Jim, you used something earlier. You said something about the social agenda of the government, or the social aims, or something like that, societal outcomes that they want to see. It felt to me like the Christian left had a probably more holistic understanding of what does it mean to see justice in a society? What does it mean to see peace and shalom in a society? What does it mean to have reconciliation and peace, right? And so I looked at that and I was like, oh, this is so great. And I'm reading the theologies behind it and so forth. But every time I came up against, and that's why we need to have universal basic income, or that's why we need to, make abortion legal because of whatever, or that's why we need to, and at the time I wasn't anti-war, but that's why we need to bring the troops home, those kinds of things. And so all of those things led me to realize that, well, their political solution is just sort of the mirror side of the conservatives. They want, and now I would say that basically the Christian left wants a Christian nation. They just don't want to call it that because that's too gauche, right? Everybody on the left right now that's railing against Trump is saying, well, the Christians, they don't read their Bible, and clearly Trump's not acting like a Christian. I'm like, well, do you want him to? Because if he did, would you say great? Or would you say, ha, there's Christian nationalism? Oh, it drives me. It's probably the thing that drives me the craziest. Sorry, I'm going to do a little aside here for a second. Donald Trump could wake up tomorrow morning and say that Jesus spoke to him in a dream last night and said that this nation needs to be a Christian nation, and then outlines the leftists' agenda and explains verse by verse, in a way that would be wrong, why America needs to become a progressive Christian nation. And they wouldn't care. They'd be like, yay, we get to enforce our values on the country and make everyone, this is like, they wouldn't be against it. They would not see the irony in that. And you and I obviously do. So in any case, I came to realize during that search, within the first 5 years after college, that the left did not have the answers either. I was listening to Glenn Beck at the time, and he kept saying this phrase, I'm a libertarian at heart. I don't know if I'd heard the word libertarian before. Maybe I had and didn't really pay too much attention to it. And because I knew the only libertarian that he would have on to talk about the economy was Ron Paul, that's kind of where I started when I realized that if I want to understand a Christian view of politics, I also have to understand economics a bit. And
right.
So that's where that's kind of where I got off that train of, oh, yay, good social values, good. These are good outcomes we should aim for. Wait a second, taxing the rich doesn't seem to be the right move. Well, but why not? I didn't have an answer. And so economics was the next logical step in my discipleship.
Okay, so you've got a Christian journey that's the Christian part of Libertarian Christian Institute.
Yeah.
I guess we're kind of working in reverse here. You've explained some of the Institute. Now you've explained some of your Christianity. Now, I guess the next part is your libertarianism.
Yeah. Well, at that point, becoming a libertarian was relatively easy. And to be honest, I mean, it was late 2008 that Norman registered libertarianchristians.com. It's possible I could have registered it 5 months prior if I'd beat him to it or something, and maybe it wouldn't have even become today what it has become. But both of us had a similar journey. We didn't know each other. Both of us had a similar journey as we were coming of age and coming into our own as young adults at that time. And so, let's see, that would have been 2008-ish. Okay. And forming my opinion in a more consistent way was what I was all about at that time. And I was writing blog posts and things like that. And then I wanted to work with Norman on libertarianchristians.com because we shared a common goal. And that's kind of where things went from there.
And put these two things together. How do they, you've kind of laid some of this out in your testimony up to this point, but how do these things fit together? I mean, you're to devote your time to getting these two ideas advanced in unison must mean that there's something special that you think happens when when you mix this peanut butter and chocolate, so to speak.
Yeah. I think it's weird. That's an interesting way to introduce that sort of pairing, because what was coming up for me is what shouldn't be paired together, right? So I have these goals that I would like to see. I want people to, live at peace with one another. I want certain, call it social justice outcomes. Like I would like to see a world where we didn't think about race because people were actually not racist, right? Whatever that means. Just take that for the best possible definition you could come up with. We don't want racism. We don't want anti-Semitism. We don't want all kinds of isms that are sort of bad relationally for people in society. Well, how do we get that? Well, it's not through affirmative action. It's not through those things. And the conservatives would want to say, well, we need to outlaw this or outlaw that. So there's a list of vices that conservatives traditionally have been like, well, no, those need to be illegal. And the left just wants the same thing. They just want to make it illegal for people to make $1 an hour or something like that, whatever below minimum wage would be at any given point, right? And so to me, there was no difference. And so to me, to think about this from a Christian perspective is to say, well, hang on, I can't make you do this. Every time I think, oh man, we should just have something in society that sort of is an institution or some sort of regulation or some sort of whatever, it's just like, well, wait, who am I to say that that's how people ought to live in the sense of I'm going to use the government, I'm going to use the state to make them live that way. Because I'd already bought into the idea that, well, if somebody wants to do something like smoke marijuana, who am I to say that they shouldn't do that in the privacy of their own home or, with friends, whatever the case may be. And the same thing, like, who am I to tell a CEO or who am I to tell a small business owner that they have to pay a certain amount? What does that even look like? And so to me, the pairing between Christian and libertarian is like, I just have no moral authority to tell you that that you need to live by the standards that I think you need to live by. And also, the other thing is, the state doesn't get a special dispensation, a special pass to utilize violence when I don't myself. I can't go, Jim and I can't fly to Bill's place and say, hey, Bill, we're going to impose a tax on your property. And you're going to be like, but for what? And we're like, oh, well, we're going to build a sidewalk around your property so you can enjoy it. I don't want this. Well, no, you have to, because we're going to, traditional pull out our guns and say, Bill, you have to pay us, which is, I guess, extortion in that particular scenario. But I don't think I have the moral authority to do that, or even the moral authority to do that with Jim together and with Jim and Bill to go to some other person's property and do that. So, the internal contradictions of conservatism and progressivism were becoming apparent to me, and still are.
Did you have a question, Bill?
Well, I was thinking about it because Doug, I'm listening to your journey, and I'm also playing in my mind at the same time, sort of like as a movie. If you could put two movies on the screen, where I was coming from. And it's interesting to listen to you because you've crystallized for me a lot of the things that I wish I'd crystallized for myself in that process. The really curious thing, and the reason I was sort of pausing on that, is that this is not a goal-based thing. Like, there isn't a moment where you say, and now it's here. This is a highly individual journey.
Yeah.
That while yours and mine are similar, and what I know about Jim's is somewhat so, it's not a one-size-fits-all.
Yes, I agree. I think what is unique about the Libertarian Christian Institute is that we do not try to create a one-size-fits-all hat or whatever you want way of being libertarian. I mean, we have our core values, like I said earlier. We also have ways in which we want to set parameters under what we consider Christian. But we're not going to say, well, if you don't believe in, I'm going to pick on our Reformed brethren because this is somewhat of an inside joke in our LCI team, but if you don't understand covenant theology, you really can't be a libertarian. Like, that's not the approach that we take. Or if you don't understand the Anabaptist tradition, well, you're not a consistent libertarian. We don't make that kind of case. You can become a libertarian and be an Anabaptist and be a Reformed person and be a Pentecostal and be a Catholic and be an Eastern Orthodox. I mean, we make friends and we are friendly with all those types that we believe you can make consistent expression of your political thought from virtually any Christian tradition.
That feels good to me. Contemplative Christian here.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
more in the Richard Rohr tradition, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
Than anything else.
It would be funny because if I had a conversation with Richard Rohr, because I'm fairly familiar with his stuff. It's been a few years since I've actually consumed it, but I'm pretty familiar with it. If I had a conversation with Richard Rohr, he probably wouldn't like libertarianism very much. But again, I would go back to the consistent ethic of Christian political thought. That phrase is a phrase that's been around for with LCI for over a decade, and to consistently express your thought as a Christian, you need to know that if you are, for somebody like Richard Rohr, if you're a true pacifist, then you're going to be insanely skeptical of government. You might find that there is civil governance that needs to happen, and you might have room for that in your theology, but you're going to be extremely cynical of federal government. You're not going to eschew this, let's get rid of the Department of Education. It's not going to be a thing for you because you believe in something different. You believe that the people are going to be able to find ways to do this peacefully. So you're not pacifist enough, I would say, to all my Anabaptist friends, if you're not a libertarian. That would be kind of my sort of cheeky, clickbait way of saying something to them.
Can we riff on Rohr for a second? Because I've been curious.
I'll try. Go ahead.
No. It's he's the one who sort of posited this, but other people have asked too. When you consider yourself just as an individual, do you feel like more of a prophet or more of a mystic?
I would say more of a prophet. It's funny. I was just having this conversation with a left-leaning friend of mine, close friend of mine. He actually went to seminary with me, and we're very close friends. And his style of understanding political engagement is very NPR, just very calm, talk it out, that kind of, prairie home companion, I guess. I don't know. I don't want to make fun of that because that all has its place. And I tend to like the rah, Soho Forum argument debate, the kind of conversations that we're having, the ones that tend to get a little heated. And part of that, I was reflecting on that because there's nothing inherently better about mine or inherently better about his. In that there is room for a prophetic voice in the scripture, and there is something called holy anger, and you can be angry at injustice and you can be angry at evil, and you can't do it you can't in a dry kind of way talk about how angry you are at evil or at how angry you are at injustice. It just doesn't work that way. I mean, you could write a cogent and not dispassionate diatribe against something, but when you want to speak truth to power, there's going to be some passion behind it. And so I would say it'd probably be more in the prophetic tradition. I know Richard Rohr is a little bit more in the mystic tradition, and I don't have anything inherently wrong with that. It doesn't appeal to me as much as I thought it would as I was exploring some of those things.
Yeah, so that hat is bulletproof. I just want to say, because we're talking to somebody with a thick skin here, right? You're ready for that.
Yeah. No.
Doug, I know that we've had the ability to have some conversations off to the side here. It should be the case that if you bring Christians together, it would actually increase peace. And I'm not sure that we could say that the influence of people participating in Christian thought in our country has actually increased peace. I think it may have actually done exactly the opposite. What do you say to that?
I think it depends on how those Christians are behaving, because I think this is kind of part of the obstacles, right? Where you have Christians who are willing to use state power to get what to sort of achieve their ends, and I think that's part of the problem.
Okay, but you're obviously, if you have a mission to put together libertarian Christians, you think it's probably significant, right? If we could bring more Christians together who actually had an ethic, like
yes.
It was a priority of peace.
Yep. Yes, I think part of the problem is that we're a little bit too tribal, and I tend to fall into this a little bit sometimes. I get passionate about certain things and and sort of am okay with certain things. Like it's hard not right now, at least in spirit, get passionate about DOGE, right? At the same time, when you step back a bit, you realize that there is something going on there that isn't necessarily I mean, maybe there's a little bit more of it than perhaps other times. There's nothing consistent ethic about it, right? There isn't some principled, list. It's not like Milton Friedman's leading this, right? Or Murray Rothbard, or Ludwig von Mises, or for that matter, even Ron Paul. We don't have, or Rand Paul for that matter, or Thomas Massey. None of these people are going through with this sort of ethic that says this is what government should not be doing. We're going to get rid of those things. There's a lot of grandstanding and a lot of sort of virtue signaling to the base of like, hey, we're going to get rid of this, we're going to get rid of that, we're going to cut this, we're going to do whatever. And as libertarian Christians, we can say, well, hey, look, that's great. I mean, I'm sure you're gonna find an acorn every now and then, maybe even more often this time around. But in any case, the consistent ethic piece is actually really important, and to some extent, there's a little bit of a challenge there, right? Because when Christians want to think about politics, they want to be on a winning team. And they want to be on the side of a movement that is gaining traction and getting and winning hearts and minds, to use a cliche term. And that's difficult sometimes for libertarians because on a grander scale, libertarianism isn't winning. Now, there might be some winning happening right now. I think the Trump administration of all lately has at least... he's within earshot of some libertarians saying things to him, whereas you probably really didn't have that over the past several administrations, even the first Trump term. So there's a lot. There's some things to be possibly excited about there, but the consistent ethic is really what we're after, because once you have that, then you can look at something and identify the problems with it, and also either be hopeful or constructively critical of those things.
And if there were enough libertarians, that things would begin to change. So it's like important that we have these conversations. We have conversations about our faith, our theology. These things are important because I've been open on this show. You very well know. I put myself in the category of done, and that means done with church. It doesn't mean done with faith. That doesn't mean that I don't believe in Jesus. It means that I just don't go to church. And one of the reasons that I don't do it has to do with the fact that if I were to go out and try to pick a church right now, most of them are going to be either a progressive version of the faith or a nationalist version of the faith. Those are the two opportunities that are out there. And you go from door to door to door. That's most of them. Then someone will say, no, we're very biblical. But then it turns out, no, they've got the flag on the stage and they're saluting the troops and they're doing the whole 9 yards. I mean, it's just at some point in the day, like if there was a church, I don't know, maybe it's the Anabaptist, but I noticed that too many of them are on the political left. If there was some kind of gathering of people who really wanted to recognize that there was a kingdom message for now, and if that kingdom message was now and Jesus was Lord, then the war ends. And I'm talking about all of them once again. All these wars go away. They become, a friend of mine, Max Borders, who I know you've had on your show as well, writes a column he calls the underthrow. I love this term. Term. It connotates a form of service that is subversive in nature, right? Or a refusal of violence that is subversive in nature, that says, you may want to do wrong, but I won't participate in wrong. You may punish me for not participating in wrong, and I will take that punishment, and everyone else will see that's how the kingdom fights. And I don't see, I think there's a grave need for what your organization's attempting to do. I think your ministry is incredibly important because there isn't this awareness of okay, more Christians should mean more peace. And it turns out more Christians, this is my personal opinion, but I think I could prove it, leads to more war.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know you have a little sticker pack that I sent you with the book, and one of them says the state is not the kingdom of God. Now, that doesn't quite fit on the hat the way that Jesus, not Caesar, is Lord does. There we go. Thank you. The state is not the kingdom of God. I don't know. You might still be able to get a T-shirt like that on our website.
And they can get a hat on the website too, right?
Yes, you can.
Which is at?
LibertarianChristians.com.
Okay, there we go. All right, keep going.
DougsGreatHats.com. No, I'm kidding.
So the state is not the kingdom of God.
Thank you. The state is not the kingdom of God. And I think that's where we have a fundamental misunderstanding and sort of misstep on both the left and the right, in that in order to achieve the ends of the kingdom of God, we need to somehow use force. And none of the parables that Jesus used to describe the kingdom of God used violence or force. It was always about, mustard seed takes a long time to grow. You have all kinds of different metaphors going on there. They're kind of evading me right now, but none of them are violent metaphors. You also have, I'll just to sort of bolster my support for the pacifist argument is imagine Genesis 1 as in comparison to, not imagine it, but consider it in comparison to the other origin stories of the ancient Near East. It's the only one where there's no violence that the world gets created. It's through God's word. And you also look at the end of the book of the Bible, the books of the Bible, and you get to Revelation, and Jesus conquers through what? The sword coming out of his mouth, which is his word. And so you have, in some sense, I wouldn't, this is more of a sort of like supporting argument than it is a primary, but you have the whole Bible bookended and central, I guess you could say, if you think of the Gospels as central, on the idea that in order to achieve peace, in order to achieve the ends of God's purpose and of shalom on earth, you are not going to use violence. You're going to avoid it at all costs. I guess there could be an argument made in some theological circles that like violence is like last resort, but that's like the best case I could ever, sort of grant somebody is last resort, not means by which we achieve things. And that's where the state gets ruled out in my mind.
Yeah, it gets ruled out because it's the politician promises something, and inherent to that promise, they're saying we are willing to enforce on other people the requirement that they have to participate in or support this given cause. I also know from our conversation aside that free speech is an important issue as far as you're concerned. And obviously, if you're involved in publishing books, putting out a blog with articles, and producing several podcasts, which we will include a list of them in the show notes, talk about speech, because we just recently went through a period where clearly that was at stake.
Yeah. I think free speech is one of the most important sort of, I want to call it a secular issue in the sense of like it's a public issue that everybody, regardless of your Christian stance, regardless of whether you're Christian, whether you're a dun or a nun or whatever, the idea that the government, or there should be somebody out there that just prevents speech from happening in some way for some, pick any reason you want, is one of the most nefarious things one of the biggest threats that I can imagine. Because as soon as you do speech censorship, you are now in the business of censoring thought, and you are now in the business of what's the word I'm looking for here? You're manipulating what people are allowed to think about. I know about so many people who, until later in 2024, felt the way they did about the direction of the country in terms of these kinds of things: censorship, free speech, the programs of DEI and ESG. And it took a few brave souls to stand up and talk about it. And then everybody was like, oh, good, somebody's finally talking about how terrible this is. And sometimes those shifts are self-serving, like we could pick on Mark Zuckerberg for, maybe it's not that, maybe he's not being that sincere. I don't know. We'll see how long this lasts. But you do have other people who are a little bit more, no, this needs to be fought and defended. And we know Elon Musk is very big on free speech. But in any case, free speech is really, really important because you don't want to control thought. As soon as you lose that, you lose the game of freedom. But I think from a general perspective of what does Christian ethics say is that we are not here to control what other people say or think. In terms of actual harms done, or in terms of actual aggression being done to others, I think those can be litigated more directly.
Well, and we would have to,
and specifically,
we would have to, in order, if we wanted to enact a censorship regime, we would have to use force, right? I mean, there's no way to maintain.
Yeah, there's that. Sorry.
I mean, even in the case of Mark Zuckerberg. Well, no, I appreciate how you answered the question, but I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of these things end up resolving back down to the same point, which is part of the reason that libertarianism is such an important tool. It's not just a political view. It is a view of like how to handle social problems. Like, what are the rules for doing this correctly?
I have a question for you, and it ultimately, a lot of these questions do come back to, well, you're not allowed to use force to do this, and that's where I personally come down to, like, well, I can't use force to make, whatever particular social outcome that I think might be good. And the reason I can't use force is because I don't actually know better, right? Like, there's that pretense of knowledge that Hayek talks about, that I don't actually know the best way for this sort of thing to filter down. I don't know what the right minimum wage is. I don't know what the right maximum salary of a big tech CEO is supposed to be. There's nothing about that is sort of like sort of a fact on the ground sort of thing. But I often wonder about, and I want you to tell me your thoughts, Jim, if you don't mind. The answer of, well, we can't use force, and so therefore we need to be against it. That's like the backstop against a lot of this. But I don't know how much purchase that has when you're trying to articulate that to others, because their mindset is a little bit more, well, we have social goals and we have social aims, and how dare you think that you're allowed to have explicit things on the back of your vehicle because there might be kids who see it or something like that. And so you can say, well, because if we're going to fight that, we need to set up this thing that violates the non-aggression principle. I don't know how much that actually convinces a lot of people. How do you
I don't actually believe it does either.
Okay.
So we have
you still have to live by your principles. I don't want to say
no.
that
We have this experience that people are familiar with as believers, where you've converted to the faith, you believe something. Mm-hmm. That is often an emotional moment. That is often sometimes it comes as a surprise that it's kind of hits you. Maybe you have certain feelings that emerge in that moment. But then you start to look at your faith and you start to dig into it, and you're like, is this thing real? Is this, should I believe this? And you begin doing this thing. We went over this with Spike Cohen a bit when he was on the show. You start doing this apologetics thing. Usually that's a post-conversion thing. He started trying to do it to resist and found out that it wasn't the right way to go about pursuing faith. So faith comes first, but then you're like, does what I'm doing here really make sense? Is it real? I use the zero aggression principle personally, or of the philosophy of human respect. There's very similar ideas. Yeah. I use these ideas as my grounding. And what they tell me is, if I exercise creative energy, if I spend the time, I will find both reasons why force is the wrong way to get this done. And I will find out why things would have been better if we hadn't. Yeah. Yeah. And so, like, you talked about the knowledge problem with minimum wage. That is, like, literally in the case of minimum wage, you're talking about a moment by moment by moment by moment decision. It's changing, and it's changing it's changing by geography. It's changing by various market circumstances. It's changing by human need, relational needs between employer and employee. That figure is all over the place, all over the time, and it's very individual. And the idea that somebody's going to be able to centrally plan that. The same thing was true of lockdowns. The idea that everybody was going to be automatically, necessarily better off, even if there had been a higher infection and death rate attached to that, it would not have been true that some individual in some distant capital whose best skill was glad handing, shaking babies and kissing hands, was somehow or other going to be able to say, this is the rule everybody needs to live by. Yeah. Yeah. And so, you brought up the knowledge problem, but that exists all over the place. The baseline thing, the place I start is that if I'm going to do anything different than persuasion or voluntary cooperation, I'm going to have to use force. And so I don't want to, I'm not going to do that. So if I'm not going to do that, it's time to get creative.
Yeah, I think the creative energies part is really, I think the phrase that I read once, and this was actually used from a leftist, but I realized that this applies more to the left as equally they were criticizing the right, is an impoverished imagination. And yes, if they believe that the only way to get something done is to just brute force, okay, I'll put it this way: brute force can get things done. Right? Like it is an accomplishment to make your kids do the thing that you want them to do. But did you make them want to do this out of like, hey, I'm contributing to the family, think of taking the trash out or doing some sort of chore that they often don't want to do. I mean, you can make your kids do it, but you can also make them feel like part of something non-violently, so to speak, in a way that like makes them want to help. So, for example, to bring up pacifism and guns for a moment. There is that phrase that the NRA likes to say, the only way to stop a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. It's like, well, yeah, in the moment, but what about all the potential support that a
100%
Christian nation, if we had a whole bunch of Christians in the nation, right, a lot of them, and they were serving one another, and they were staying connected to what would be an outcast individual who has mental troubles or is on too many, more meds than RFK Jr. would allow, right? That's being sarcastic, right? Sorry, I couldn't resist. I'll stop. Doing all the wrong, whatever the wrong things are. Where's the church supporting the types of individuals that would think of grabbing a gun and planning to go to a school? Like, that's actually the more creative, difficult answer for prevention of violence. Now, taking away guns rights, is not the right way, because that, again, still uses force. But what is the creative solution? And when you find yourself in a place able to be creative, and you can't be creative all on your own. I mean, the Elon Musks of the world, the Steve Jobs of the world can come up with solutions with teams, and maybe even on their own brilliant mind while they're, in the shower thinking of some grandiose idea, they might do that. But it takes people cooperating together to come up with societal level solutions that are actually peaceful. And it's a shortcut. The state is a shortcut to achieving a result. It is definitely not the kingdom way.
Well, we've used that shortcut by virtue of our vote for a long, long time, and given the state all the power that we as individuals ought to properly wield.
Yeah, I mean, there's also a case to be made for, not a case, but like there is a case being made out there that because individuals aren't handling this, the state has to step in. And the answer to that isn't, oh, well, I guess so. I don't believe Barack Obama when he said the government is the things that we do together. Like, that's ridiculous. Mm-hmm. Because it's like, no, you're just trying to make me feel good. And
no, it's the things we hand off.
Yeah, it is. It's the things we hand off. And it's like, it's like, what is it? Taxes are the price we pay for living in an uncivil society or something like that. It's like the opposite, right? So of what people often want to say. So I think the creative solution is the one of peace and is the way of peace. I am not 100% opposed to those like shortcut things.
And those things make you exercise. Those things make you exercise certain social muscles. You have to. That was easy for me to say. You have to learn. You have to learn how to talk to people. You have to learn how to listen. You have to learn how to empathize and understand. You have to learn how to solve problems. You have to learn how to cooperate. I mean, all of these things, these are skills that we don't have to deal with if we can just pick up the phone and dial 911, or if we can just lobby our politician to take care of it. It's not, we don't become stronger. We don't become more relationally connected. And we're less creative. I want to talk to you a little bit more about your experiences. We're wrapping up here. And I'm curious, is there anything that you guys are doing right now at Libertarian Christian Institute that is like a big win for you at the moment, or that you particularly like to brag about? What's happening that's like the good news?
We ended 2024 pretty strong in a number of ways, and we're able to sort of launch into 2025 with the two books. I'm gonna hold them up again here that we're publishing. And so, for me, a personal win is being able to sort of guide these two things to production, to publication, and to work with the authors on that. Another thing that we're working on, I'll share here in a second, is that we're able to publish an updated version of Faith Seeking Freedom. We're kind of in the works on that, and so leading a team on that. So having the freedom to be able to focus on the kinds of products and materials that we need to get out there to Christians, and even to other libertarians who don't know how to make the case to Christians. Because, even if unless you're a hardcore atheist and you stay away from all the Christians, the atheist libertarian still needs to win. Over the libertarian movement. Still needs to win Christians in order to win, if you will.
What do you want to see for the world right now?
I feel like I'm on the spot, like in Miss Congeniality, where she's like, "Well, I have to say world peace." Because the funny thing is, that's actually the first thing that I thought. No, I didn't say world peace, but I was just like, I want people to get along. And I know that sounds so cheesy.
Okay, so it has the added benefit of being true.
Well, it has the added benefit of being true, and I don't mean to. Yeah, that was a nice little funny way of starting the answer. But like, to an extent, I really do want, despite the fact that as a libertarian I like to fight and have arguments with people, I do want people to get along, and I do want people to show each other grace and respect. The thing that's sort of agonizing to me right now. And this happens anytime you have a change of administration. You have people assuming the worst about why Donald Trump or Elon Musk is doing things. And I'm like, look, I don't even have to defend any of these actions. These could all be despicable actions in reality, and I could agree with you. But the way I see people going about this is very juvenile. And it's like, you really have to give more respect to people who disagree with you across the aisle and be willing to have those conversations and understand, well, where are they coming from? And they could be completely wrong, or you could be completely wrong, and you can come to understandings that you're just like, well, we're just going to have to disagree. But the ability to have those conversations with others is failing. People aren't able to do that as much. With a
wink of a tiny bit of irony. We
sure.
have to agree with you, because I think that kind of is what grace is all about, right? It's extending favor to people that you disagree with, and the very first step of that is listening and conversing.
Yeah.
So, what is the most satisfying moment you've had in this work?
There were a couple moments at Freedom Fest that I remember at our booth, or maybe while we were at a breakout session that I wasn't a part of. I was part of one of them, but the one I'm thinking of is one that I was basically doing the video and photography for. As at that time the CEO of LCI, and having essentially been the event coordinator for our efforts doing that, I felt very proud of our team because we were having conversations with so many people. The one in Freedom Fest, I guess it was 2023, was in Memphis, and that one in particular was noteworthy because we were very busy. Our booth was very busy in comparison to those around us, and it kind of stood out. And I think that there was a moment where I just had this sort of moment of pride and satisfaction in understanding that, like, as a pretty small organization run on a very low budget, I would say but a fairly low budget relative to a lot of these other liberty organizations, we've been able to punch well above our weight in the ability to deliver solid work, not just a few random blog posts out there on the internet that are from a Christian perspective. And there are really good ones out there, but we have a consistent output over a decade and more of being able to help Christians know what society can look like if we think in a Christian way, and also know what it looks like for others to have that journey, and also to hear from others from various aspects all over the spectrum of libertarian thought and economic thought, through our podcast, through our interviews, all those things. We have just become a sort of huge library of knowledge that people can come to, and that's, you can only sort of be proud of that in retrospect. I mean, you can be proud of what you're doing as you're doing it, because you're doing good work, and you're doing something that is worthwhile, and it's something that you're passionate about. But being able to step back and just kind of observe the moment. I think that moment at Freedom Fest was probably that one, because it involved the people that were doing the work. We were not all of us from the team, but there was a big part of us. We're all there in one spot, doing the work, talking to people, doing the interviews, convincing people. Some of them were arguing with the Atheists for Liberty people, and also having good conversations, arguing in a good way is what I mean. So anyway, that's my moment.
Very good. What is the airspeed velocity of an unladen swallow?
Oh my gosh, I should have been prepared for this. Purple, 42. That's it.
But that's a little fun we had from our prep for the show. It's very hard being a guest and not knowing what the questions are going to be in advance.
Yeah.
How
that one I should have seen coming.
You should have seen that one coming. How do people get involved with the Libertarian Christian Institute? What are the points of entry, and what happens when they do?
Yeah. So, I mean, first thing I would do, I'm gonna say the cliche, like and subscribe us on YouTube. Like that's one way of doing it. We work on a lot of what we produce is volunteer basis. And so we rely heavily on people to go to our website, libertarianchristians.com, and read and share, go to our YouTube page, which you can get to from our website, like, subscribe, all those kinds of things. That grows our support and helps us, it helps the algorithms reach other people. It also means that you're going to keep getting our content if you subscribe to our newsletter, if you subscribe to our shows. And it means that you're going to be aware of what we're doing, and not everything we're going to produce is going to be of interest to you. We're doing book clubs, where we're reading a book and we're discussing it together. And there's a book that we just started our book club, last night on the art of biblical narrative. And it's a little bit more dense, a little bit more scholarly. And there's other books that we do, and some of these aren't going to hit everybody the right way. And so not everything we're going to do is going to hit everybody. But if you subscribe, what you do is you stay aware of what we're doing. If somebody wants to get involved, you can donate. So there's a donate button on our website. You can also contribute. If you go to, I think it's under the contact page, you can enter a submission to like an article that could be, relevant to current events. There's a bunch of guidelines right there to do that. And you can email me as well. I mean, if you just want to chat with me or, any one of us, you can, any of the shows or whatever, you can send us an email on our contact page, and we'll start conversations with you if you just have some questions, that kind of thing. Right now, I would be remiss if I didn't say go buy one of the books. Well, of course, House Divided is not quite out yet. So we have House Divided, Anarchist Anabaptist, Faith Seeking Freedom. These I have another one. It's called Strangers with Candy. If you go to our website, you'll see the books. It's a little bit more of like a basic economics book. I should have had it here and be prepared. It's nice and pink, big pink color, really bright. Buy our books. That's a simple way to get something in return for supporting what we do. Books are not that expensive to produce, so when we sell them, we do pretty well, and you get something.
And your hats and other.
Yes,
swag.
The swag we don't push super strongly, but every time somebody sees them, you stand out.
Well,
we've been pretty strategic with what we choose to do for merch, because we want people to stand out. We don't want to just sort of cheapen it by just being like, here's a bunch of merch. So,
but it also stands out to be a conversation starter, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
What's a conversation like when somebody sees the hat or one of your other objects?
You know what? Norman Horn is the best person for this because he wears his LCI stuff when he goes to Panera Bread to do work remotely.
Yeah.
I work from home. When I do wear this at church, like church events that wearing a hat would be okay. I get nothing. I don't know if people don't want to argue with me or if they already know where I stand and they're like, whatever. But you should have Norman on to talk about that because he's had some crazy conversations with people who noticed his shirt, went online, actually bought the shirt, like seriously. So, he's a better person to ask for that, but I actually don't have.
So one outcome of wearing the shirt or wearing the hat is
people
that
leave you alone.
Somebody's likely to come along and buy another one.
Yeah,
and now they're
true.
sharing it out.
Somehow they just leave me alone. I don't know if it's me or the shirt, so it's probably me.
Is it you?
It's probably me. It's okay. I'm an introvert. I'm okay with that. Good part of the day.
If I wanted to say anything, I wouldn't be wearing this hat right now.
That's
Doug.
That's a really good point. Yes.
Doug, thank you very much for joining us here on Gracearchy.
This has been great. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Bill.